Welcome back to part 3 in our series. Welcome to my home. Thank you for inviting me into your home so that we can talk about God and we can talk about how he feels about us and our journey with him and how he wants us to relate to each other. Last week, we talked about why God says he exists. I want to talk about how God says he exists tonight. I want to talk about how we come to know that God exists, how God comes to make himself known to us. I believe that we read to be informed, but it's in the lived places of experience that theory takes on its own meaning. No matter how much you put your head to the book, it's in the practice that you understand. And the biblical narrative is no exception to the rule. As a matter of fact, it is built on the idea that faith in God, trust in God, is first established by God's intervention and God's action. In the biblical world and in the biblical narrative, God never asks human beings to trust him, to believe in him, without first giving them reason to see and believe that he can be believed and trusted. In the biblical narrative, God always puts the onus on himself to move first, to act first, to love first, to intervene first. We see that played out in the very first story of Adam and Eve when they messed up everything. When through their decisions, they introduced the phenomenon of sin into the human experience. God comes into their space. God comes to be present and immediate in their space. But what do? They hide. Why? For two reasons. Number one, because they're ashamed. Number two, because they're afraid. They're afraid of God. They're afraid of their nakedness. They've tried to fix it, but nothing works. God comes to be in their space, and God speaks to them in relation to where they find themselves into relation to each other and in relation to him. When he says, "Where are you?" Well, they have moved from that space of love and trust to that space of hiding and fear. And God operates within their reality. God steps into their reality, becomes present in their reality, brings solution to their reality, brings power to their reality. At the end of their experience and they're dealing with him and they're trying to hide their nakedness, the story says God covered them. From that day, they understood that because of the intervention and the actions of God, God can be believed and God can be trusted. Well, they knew that before, but they made decisions based on somebody else's idea that God couldn't. And then we see how that turned out. God reminded them once again. And so throughout the biblical narrative, God always has to come and step first. God has to love first. The Apostle John in the New Testament would write, "We love God because he first loved us." Jesus said to his disciples, he put it in another way. He said, "You didn't choose me. I chose you. I chose you." And because life creates life, life also attracts life. So God is always pictured in relation to lived experience and lived journey. He's always pictured in that space. He's always informing us he's always informing us that he exists by coming to bear on the places that his existence is most impactful. It's most treasured. it's most recognized. Everything that I know about what it means to know God, everything that I know that matters about God, I first learned watching my mother's journey with God and watching the knock-on effect that journey had with the rest of our family. I am the youngest of 10 children, 8 living. My father decided to leave my mother for the last time when I was 5 years old. He never came back into the marital home again. He was close enough to be seen, but never close enough to be present. So he always stayed on the periphery of our lives. My mother met Jesus. No, Jesus met my mother, because my mother wasn't looking for Jesus. My mother wasn't looking for God, but God was looking for my mother. And God met my mother in, when I was around about 8 years old. He met her and he spoke to her out of the prophet Isaiah 44:45. He said to her, when, and I'm paraphrasing, when your husband walks out on you, I will be a husband to you, I will be a father to the children, and I will take away the reproach or the stigma from your name. A husband to you, a father to the children, take away the reproach from your name. God brought everything that he was to bear on her lived experience. He brought everything that comes with knowing him to bear on her lived experience. He moved in her life and he moved through her life so that she understood, because he acted first. She believed because he moved first. She trusted because he revealed himself first. And it was such a beautiful thing. It was such a beautiful thing for me to see as a young person. I understand it. I should have done that a lot smoother, shouldn't I? That one was like jagged right across my face. So let me try again. I understand. I understand. I understand because I would see the way he kept his promises. And so I have come to know God as a God who makes promises and keeps promises. That's how God showed to me that he existed. I heard the faithful consistency of God through her prayers, and saw the depth of his commitment to being a father to us, even in our teenage years when we just went way off the rails. We went way off the rails. We kept our mother on her knees. We kept her on her knees in prayer. But I heard the faithful consistency of God in the depth of her prayers. I remember once when we was younger, you know, there's the nursery rhyme, oh, Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard to feed the children, but when she got there, the cupboard was bare. So, they didn't have any food. It was literally a Mother Hubbard moment. We had literally nothing in the house to eat. Nothing in the house to eat. And I remember Mom making us kneel down in the kitchen. We knelt down and we was just praying. And I remember Mom talking to God. She weren't complaining and she weren't berating, but she was speaking like somebody who intimately knew the person she was talking to. She was reminding him that he promised to be a faithful husband and that she was being a faithful wife. He reminded her, she reminded God, that he promised to be a provider, that these were his children and that his children were hungry. Our children were hungry. And she just spoke from that space. Now, we lived in London. I'm a Londoner, London born, London bred, London fed, London wed. So we lived in one of those Victorian 2 up, 1 down houses, and the kitchen was in the basement. While Mum was in the midst of that prayer, we heard the door knock. But you know, mum ain't rushed through her prayers. She finished her prayer. When she'd finished, she sent my brother and I up to see who knocked the door. We went and we opened up the door, looked out on the street, no one to the left, no one to the right. But an envelope had been posted through the letterbox. Anyway, I picked up the envelope, I took it downstairs, and I gave it to my mum. When my mum opened up the envelope, there was a little wad of cash in the envelope. And my mum literally looked at the money, looked up to the ceiling, said, "Thank you." And then she carried on like God had just walked in with the wages, like a husband at the end of the week, walked in with the wages and just given her the wage packet and said, "Sort the house out." Literally, it was that calm. It was literally that smooth. It was that expected. It was literally that expected. And that really informed for me how God says he exists. He exists in the prayers of mothers for their children. He exists in the prayers of children for their own lives. He exists in the mundane every day. He exists in the deeper spaces in life, the lived intersections between relationships, conversations, and meaning is the best way to describe how God says and God declares his existence to my mother and to us as human beings. That moved on in extension to who I am. I turned 50 6 years ago. And before I had turned 50, I remember in a quiet space, just before I turned 50, I felt God speaking to my spirit. He said to me, "Eddie, you know those promises I made to your mother? To be a husband to her, to be a father to you all, to take away the reproach from your name." I said, "Yeah." And I felt God say to me, "I made those promises to you too. But you were too young to hear. You were too young to realize. But the promises that I was making to your mom, I was making to all of you. All of you." How does God say he exists? God says he exists in the lived intersections between relationships, between conversations and meaning. God says he exists. And I found for myself that depth of understanding that's where God finds himself in my space, where he finds himself in my space as a father, finds himself in my space as a husband, finds himself in my space as a leader, a trainer of leaders, as historically as a pastor, now as a consultant. All of these spaces, how people now relate to my life, how people come into connection with my life. And I don't declare that I am a man of faith. I don't declare that I am a minister by calling and vocation. We just continue on with our lives. But then they turn around and say, "What is it that you do? What is it that you do?" And I tell them, "Well, by vocation, I'm a minister. But by occupation at the moment, I run a consultancy." They said, "I knew there was something about you. I knew there was something about you." But what it is that they're sensing is the intersections in my life between relationship, conversation, and meaning, where God where God is consistently moving. That rolls over into their experience with me. And that's how God says he exists. Make no mistake about it. That's how God says he exists. For some people, that idea is kind of problematic because it means that God exists in everyone who is perfect, and God exists and he's moving through only the people who are good. No, it means that God is finding space in everybody's journey in order to reveal himself to them and reveal himself through others. that God is ever present, God is ever near, and God is ever moving. What is my prayer for you? My prayer is that you will not only come to realize that there is a God of intentionality seeking to make himself known to you, but that also that intentionality will be made manifest in your lived experience. Thank you. Thank you so much for the way in which you have been engaging us over the past few weeks. I don't know what I have done with this thing in the meantime. Hold on. You've been in my house a couple of weeks now, so like we're just together. So, oh, there you go. That's much better. You know, people have been commenting that they like my dog down in the corner. Anyway, thank you so much for your feedback on my presentations, also the presentations of Pastor Bobby. Listen, keep your questions coming in from week to week. Keep your thoughts coming in from week to week. We really do appreciate. And remember to share these. Remember to follow Mount Pisgah. Remember to follow these candid conversations and to share them. Share them with your friends. You know, hand them out like you know, a good tip for a good restaurant, a good tip for a good cafe, a good place to eat. Because this is food for life. Somebody had sent in a question from a couple of weeks ago. And the question was, what about those who hope for emancipation and deliverance and never saw it? Speaking about those who were in Egyptian slavery in the Bible. But didn't God say in Genesis that they would be in Egyptian bondage for a long time? Well, I don't know that God did say that. I know in Exodus 12:40 that Moses records that they were in Egypt for a long time, for 430 years. But there is no record of God saying that you're going to go into slavery for 430 years. He did say to Israel, the formed nation of Israel, not just this group of people. Because remember, Israel ended up in Egypt because of Joseph. Remember, Joseph was the one that was sold into Egyptian slavery, but then he rose to prominence in the Egyptian government. And then when a famine hit the whole region, and Egypt was the governing empire across all of these regions, then Israel and the Hebrews, who were just a tribe of people, a small tribe of people, they went to Egypt to look for food. They realized that their brother was almost the prime minister. Not the pharaoh, but the prime minister in the country, and they settled in Egypt. And so they settled there for a long time, and they grew. So when when Genesis closes, it closes with Joseph dying, Jacob dying in Egypt, but the people becoming prolific and growing. And it opens by saying that a new king came, and that king had enslaved them. So there is no real record of God saying that I'm going to enslave you for 430 years. There is the record, however, after hundreds of years later, when the reformed nation and of Babylon coming into Egypt, into Israel, forgive me, and Babylon taking them into captivity, and God saying to them, "No, I'm sending you into Babylon, but for 70 years, and at the end of 70 years, I'm bringing you back." So that is the record that we have. But once again, it just goes to it plays to the whole idea that God sits in the middle. How does he make himself known? He sits in the middle of he makes himself known by sitting in the middle of our lived experience. He makes himself known by coming into the midst of our lived experience. And I hope that is something that you understood. I'm hoping that's something that you understand from day to day. We study to be informed of who God is, but it's in the living of life that we truly understand. Christianity is a lived experience, because Christianity is about the life of a person within our existence, and that person is Jesus Christ. that person is Jesus Christ. So thank you. I'm looking to see if there are any other questions that have come in. It's good to have these candid conversations. Good to have all of these spaces in which these conversations can take place and these questions can take place. Please keep your questions coming in from week to week. Keep interacting with us. We don't have all the answers, but we do know that we can create enough conversation and open this enough that other people might have a clearer answer, might have a clearer perspective. We're not here to be the font of all. We're not here to be the font of all wisdom. We're just here as beggars who are having found bread, are helping other beggars to find bread. And I think that's a beautiful analogy for how to live our best life. That we are poured into, we are blessed, and we pour back into. We stretch our hands across and we stretch ourselves across each other's experience. A question has come in here. Question just even deeper thought. So the question has come in here, but for one step further, because Pastor Eddie, one step further, because I'm sure the question is with a deeper thought that they didn't see the promise. How do they deal with it? How do they deal with that? How do they deal with that? The fact that they didn't see the promise. Those who didn't see the promise of freedom from slavery. And then those who wandered in the wilderness for 40 years and didn't see the promised land. What about the times we pray and God doesn't answer? What if my mother's prayers had never been answered? What happens then? All prayers are answered. No is a legitimate answer. We do that with our children, don't we? Come on now. Sometimes we'll tell our children no, and we'll give our children no with a reason. And then sometimes as parents, you'll just say no. Well, why? There isn't a why. There's just a no. But something very funny happens when it comes to faith. When it comes to faith, we ain't willing to trust God with a no without explanation. But if there is a no without explanation, but we are conscious of the fact that he is still with us, even though we do not have that no, is he enough? Is that enough? Or must everything in our relationship be based on whether or not you can have the evidence to move on? Is the evidence that he is present enough? Is the evidence that he has been present enough? Is it enough to enable you to trust for an answer that he's probably not willing to give you, or that you're not going to get yet? You're not going to get yet. Because if lived life is like that, then faith life is like that too. And when that happens with me and my daughter, do you know what makes the difference? What makes the difference is how she comes to bear in living within the reality of my love and my care for her. That is what makes the difference. Well, how do you know the difference between no and a not yet? You know that by just continuing to live in that space. You know that by continuing to live in that space. You know that by the fact that if you're looking for something and you're praying for something and it's causing so many other things around you to lose value, to have no meaning, that people around you are beginning to lose value in their lives because of your obsession with this, then really, is that something that God wants for you? Is that something that you should be chasing? Is that something that God is probably saying, like, no, this isn't for you? Because there are instances in the Bible in which, you know, people asked and asked and asked and asked, and then in the end, God gave them what they want. They got what they want and they lost what they had. Case in point, a king. Israel wanted a king. Why? Because they said, because we want to be like the other nations. God was like, no, I'm your king. They said, no, we want a physical king. We want a king that we can see, you know, and we want the king of our choosing. What can God do? Salvation is based on choice. He gave them the choice. They got what they wanted, but they lost what they had. So, you know, My mother prayed for me for years. I'll end with this story because our time is coming down. I was a 17-year-old. I was saved at 17 under the preaching of Dick Barron. I was sitting at the back of a massive evangelistic tent, hiding, and the Holy Spirit found me there. I was tricked by my mother. My mother tricked me into going because she knew if I sat in God's presence for one evening, God was going to get me. So said, so done. I went there the first night. He made an appeal. I gave my life to Jesus Christ as a 17-year-old. And I spent 2 years of just beauty and involvement and preaching and doing so many things as a teenager. I left at 19. And while I was gone, the Lord put this prayer on my mum's heart, but she didn't want to pray it. What she prayed was, bring Eddie back to church. Father, please bring Eddie back to church. He's your child. He's our child. Bring him back to church. And the Lord said to her, Phyllis, I don't want you to pray that prayer. I want you to pray this prayer. And when he told her what the prayer was, I remember her telling it to me. She said, no, I don't want to pray that. I don't want to pray that. And so she kept on praying, bring him back to church, bring him back to church. Until in the end, she couldn't ignore the prayer. Do you know what the prayer was? This was the prayer. Lord, any way you're going to save Eddie, just save him. And anyhow you're going to save Eddie, just save him. And she knew that the way we were living at the time, saving me might have meant me being put in the grave. And she sees me at the resurrection. And she wanted the prayer answered that she had control over. But God said, no, you're going to have to free that boy and give him into my hands and trust me with him. And when she did that, well, here I am today. Here I am today. Because God comes and moves into our space. He moves into the difficult spaces of our space. And he says, yes, you're going to have freedom. And he says, no, freedom ain't for you. And he says, yeah, but you're going to have to wait a while. But in all three answers, I'm going to be present with you. Whether it becomes immediately, whether you have to wait, or whether it's never coming at all. Whether for you it's a no, I am going to be present with you in all of those spaces. And that's what God calls us to remember. That's what God calls us to. I am going to take a moment to be very, very smooth and just wipe my forehead because it's still summer here in Australia. That was a lot smoother. That was a lot smoother. Maybe what I should have done was just tap my head like that. Yeah, I think maybe what I should have done was just tap my head like that. Please keep your questions coming in. And we'll be here with you next week. Remember to tune in on Sunday evening for Pastor Bobby and more Candid Conversations.
Thank you for joining us this evening for Candid Conversation. If you love what you saw here tonight, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as turn on your bell notifications so that way you know every time we go live. Have any questions? Be sure to click the link in our description box and let us know your thoughts. And remember, ain't no judgment on this side. Also, be sure to like, comment, and share us on all of your social media platforms so that way your friends and family can be a part of the community as well and stay in the know of everything here at Mount Pisgah. See you next time.